is Ethan, and today we're going to be playing Minecraft and also reading some more of Game of Thrones. So in the last episode where we read this, which I'll put it in a playlist together, we read the prologue and chapter 1 and 2. We are skipping chapter 3 as well as any Daenerys chapters because her storyline at the start is very heavy. So if you want the full experience, I would very much recommend just reading the books yourself. I just don't want to, this is for relaxation, obviously. Game of Thrones is pretty heavy anyway, but Daenerys really, her storyline goes bad fast. She is an amazing character though, so I would recommend reading her chapters. But we're starting on chapter 4, which is from Ned's point of view, and I imagine we'll get through quite a couple, so let's get straight into it. Chapter 4, Eddard. The visitors poured through the castle gates in a river of gold and silver and polished steel, 300 strong, a pride of bannermen and knights, of sworn swords and free riders. Over their heads 12 golden banners whipped back and forth in the northern wind, emblazoned with the crowned stag of Baratheon. Ned knew many of these riders. There came Sir Jaime Lannister with hair as bright as beaten gold, and there Sandor Clegane with his terrible burned face. The tall boy beside him could only be the crown prince, and that stunted little man behind them was surely the imp Tyrion Lannister. Yet the huge man at the head of the column, flanked by 2 knights in the snow-white cloaks of the King's Guard, seemed almost a stranger to Ned, until he vaulted off the back of the warhorse with a familiar roar and crushed him in a bone-crunching hug. Ned, but it is good to see that frozen face of yours. The king looked him over to top to bottom and laughed. You have not changed at all. Would that Ned had been able to say the same. 15 years passed when they had ridden forth to win a throne. The Lord of Storm's End had been clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and muscled like a maiden's fantasy. 6.5 feet tall, he towered over lesser men, and when he donned his armor and the great antlered helmet of his house, he became a veritable giant. He'd had a giant's strength, too, his weapon of choice a spiked iron warhammer that Ned could scarcely lift. In those days, the smell of leather and blood had clung to him like perfume. Now it was perfume that clung to him like perfume, and he had a girth to match his height. Ned had last seen the king 9 years before, during Balon Greyjoy's rebellion, when the stag and the direwolf had joined to end the pretensions of the self-proclaimed king of the Iron Islands. Since the night they had stood side by side in Greyjoy's fallen stronghold, where Robert had accepted the rebel lord's surrender, and Ned had taken his son Theon as hostage and ward, the king had gained at least 8 stone. A beard as coarse and black as iron wire covered his jaw to hide his double chin and the sag of the royal jowls, but nothing could hide his stomach or the dark circles under his eyes. Yet Robert was Ned's king now, and not just a friend, so he said only, "Your Grace, Winterfell is yours." By then the others were dismounting as well, and grooms were coming forward for their mounts. Robert's queen, Cersei Lannister, entered on foot with her younger children. The wheelhouse in which they had ridden, a huge double-decked carriage of oiled oak and gilded metal, pulled by 40 heavy draft horses, was too wide to pass through the castle gate. Ned knelt in the snow to kiss the queen's ring, while Robert embraced Catelyn like a long-lost sister. Then the children had been brought forward, introduced, and approved of by both sides. No sooner had those formalities of greeting been completed than the king had said to his host, "Take me down to your crypt, Eddard. I would pay my respects." Ned loved him for that, for remembering her still after all these years. He called for a lantern. No other words were needed. The queen had begun to protest. They had been riding since dawn. Everyone was tired and cold. Surely they should refresh themselves first. The dead would wait. She had said no more than that. Robert had looked at her, and her twin brother Jaime had taken her quietly by the arm, and she had said no more. They went down to the crypt together, Ned and this king he scarcely recognized. The winding stone steps were narrow. Ned went first with his lantern. "I was starting to think we would never reach Winterfell," Robert complained as they descended. "In the south, the way they talk about my 7 kingdoms, a man forgets forgets that your part is as big as the other 6 combined. I trust you enjoyed the journey, Your Grace. Robert snorted. Bogs and forests and fields and scarcely a decent inn north of the neck. I've never seen such a vast emptiness. Where are all your people? Likely they were too shy to come out, Ned jested. He could feel the chill coming up the stairs, a cold breath from deep within the earth. Kings are a rare sight in the north. Robert snorted. More likely they were hiding under the snow. Snow, Ned. The king put one hand on the wall to steady himself as they descended. Late summer snows are common enough, Ned said. I hope they did not trouble you. They are usually mild. The others take your mild snows, Robert swore. What will this place be like in winter? I shuddered to think. The winters are hard, Ned admitted, but the Starks will endure. We always have. You need to come south, Robert told him. You need a taste of summer before it flees. In Highgarden there are fields of golden roses that stretch away as far as the eye can see. The fruits are so ripe they explode in your mouth. Melons, peaches, fire plums, you've never tasted such sweetness. You'll see I brought you some. Even at storm's end, with the good wind off the bay, the days are so hot you can barely move. And you ought to see the towns, Ned. Flowers everywhere, the markets bursting with food, the summer wines so cheap and so good that you can get drunk just breathing the air. Everyone is fat and drunk and rich. He laughed and slapped his own ample stomach a thump. And the girls, Ned, he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. I swear women lose all modesty in the heat. They swim naked in the river right beneath the castle. Even in the streets, it's too damn hot for wool or fur, so they go around in these short gowns, silk if they have the silver, and cotton if not. But it's all the same when they start sweating and the cloth sticks to their skin. They might as well be naked. The king laughed happily. Robert Baratheon had always been a man of huge appetites, a man who knew how to take his pleasures. That was not a charge anyone could lay at the door of Eddard Stark. Yet Ned could not help but notice that those pleasures were taking a toll on the king. Robert was breathing heavily by the time they reached the bottom of the stairs, his face red in the lantern light as they stepped out into the darkness of the crypt. Your Grace, Ned said respectfully. He swept the lantern in a wide semicircle. Shadows moved and lurched. Flickering light touched the stone underfoot and brushed a long procession of granite pillars that marched ahead, 2 by 2, into the dark. Between the pillars, the dead sat on their stone thrones against the wall, backs against the sepulchres that contained their mortal remains. She's down at the end with Father and Brandon. He led the way between the pillars, and Robert followed wordlessly, shivering in the subterranean chill. It was always cold down here. Their footsteps rang off the stones and echoed in the vault overhead as they walked amongst the dead of House Stark. The lords of Winterfell watched them pass. Their likeness was carved into the stone that sealed the tombs. In long rows they sat, blind eyes staring out into eternal darkness, while great stone dire wolves curled around their feet. The shifting shadows made the stone figures seem to stir as the living passed by. By ancient custom, an iron longsword had been laid across the lap of each who had been Lord of Winterfell to keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. The oldest had long ago rusted away to nothing, leaving only a few red stains where the metal had rested on stone. Ned wondered if that meant those ghosts were free to roam the castle now. He hoped not. The first lords of Winterfell had been men hard as the land they ruled. In the centuries before the dragon lords came over the sea, they had sworn allegiance to no man, styling themselves the kings in the north. Ned stopped at last and lifted the oil lantern. The crypt continued on into the darkness ahead of them, but beyond this point the tombs were empty and unsealed. Black holes waiting for their dead, waiting for him and his children. Ned did not like to think on that. Here, he told the king. Robert nodded silently, knelt, and bowed his head. There were 3 tombs, side by side. Lord Rickard Stark, Ned's father, had a long, stern face. The stonemason had known him well. He sat with quiet dignity, stone fingers holding tight to the sword across his lap, but in life all swords had failed him. In 2 smaller crypts on either side were his children. Brandon had been 20 when he had died, strangled by order of the Mad King Aerys Targaryen, only a few short days before he was to be wedded His father had been forced to watch him die. He was the true heir, the eldest, born to rule. Lyanna had only been 16, a child woman of surpassing loveliness. Ned had loved her with all his heart. Robert had loved her even more. She was to have been his bride. She was more beautiful than that, the king said after a silence. His eyes lingered on Lyanna's face as if he could will her back to life. Finally, he rose, made awkward by his weight. Damn it, Ned, did you have to bury her in a place like this? His voice was hoarse with remembered grief. She deserved more than darkness. She was a Stark of Winterfell, Ned said quietly. This is her place. She should be on a hill somewhere, under a fruit tree, with the sun and clouds above her and the rain to wash her clean. I was with her when she died, Ned reminded the king. She wanted to come home, to rest beside Brandon and father. He could hear her still at times. Promise me, she had cried, in a room that smelled of blood and roses. Promise me, Ned. The fever had taken her strength, and her voice had been faint as a whisper, but when he gave her his word, the fear had gone out of his sister's eyes. Ned remembered the way she had smiled then, how tightly her fingers had clutched his as she gave up her hold on life, the rose petals spilling from her palm, dead and black. After that he remembered nothing. They had found him still holding her body, silent with grief. The little Crannog man, Howland Reed, had taken her hand from his. Ned could recall none of it. I bring her flowers when I can, he said. Lyanna was fond of flowers. The king touched her cheek, his fingers brushing against the rough stone as gently as if it were living flesh. I vowed to kill Rhaegar for what he did to her. You did, Ned reminded him. Only once, Robert said bitterly. They had come together at the ford of the Trident while the battle crashed around them. Robert with his warhammer and his great antlered helm, the Targaryen prince, armored all in black. On his breastplate was the three-headed dragon of his house, wrought all in rubies that flashed like fire in the sunlight. The waters of the Trident ran red around the hooves of their destriers as they circled and clashed again and again, until at last a crushing blow from Robert's hammer stove in the dragon and the chest beneath it. When Ned had finally come on scene, Rhaegar lay dead in the stream, while men of both armies scrambled in the swirling waters for rubies knocked free of his armor. In my dreams, I kill him every night, Robert admitted. 1,000 deaths will still be less than he deserves. There was nothing Ned could say to that. After a quiet, he said, We should return, your grace. Your wife will be waiting. The others take my wife, Robert muttered sourly, but he started back the way they had come, his footsteps falling heavily. And if I hear your grace once more, I'll have your head on a spike. We are more to each other than that. I had not forgotten, Ned replied quietly. When the king did not answer, he said, Tell me about John. Robert shook his head. I've never seen a man sicken so quickly. We gave a tourney on my son's name day. If you had seen John then, you could have sworn he would live forever. A fortnight later, he was dead. The sickness was like a fire in his gut. It burned right through him. He paused beside a pillar before the tomb of a long-dead Stark. I loved that old man. We both did. Ned paused a moment. Catelyn fears for her sister. How does Lysa bear her grief? Robert's mouth gave a bitter twist. Not well, in truth, he admitted. I think losing John has driven the woman mad, Ned. She has taken the boy back to the Eyrie, against my wishes. I'd hoped to foster him with Tywin Lannister at Casterly Rock. John had no brothers, no other sons. Was I supposed to leave him raised by that woman? Ned would sooner entrust a child to a pit viper than to Lord Tywin, but he left his doubts unspoken. Some old wounds never truly heal and bleed again at the slightest word. The wife has lost the husband, he said carefully. Perhaps the mother feared to lose the son. The boy is very young, 6 and sickly, and Lord of the Eyrie. Gods have mercy, the king swore. Lord Tywin had never taken a word before. Lysa ought to have been honored. The Lannisters are a great and noble house. She refused to even hear of it. Then she left in the dead of night without so much as a by your leave. Cersei was furious. He sighed deeply. The boy is my namesake, did you know that? Robert Arryn. I'm sworn to protect him. How can I do that if his mother steals him away? I will take him as ward if you wish, Ned said. Lysa would consent to that. She and Catelyn were close as girls, and she would be welcome here as well. Generous offer, my friend, the king said, but too late. Lord Tywin has already given his consent. Fostering the boy elsewhere would be a grievous affront to him. I have more concern for my nephew's welfare than I do for Lannister pride, Ned declared. That is because you do not sleep with a Lannister, Robert laughed, the sound rattling among the tombs and bouncing from the vaulted ceiling. His smile was a flash of white teeth in the thicket of his huge black beard. And Ned, he said, you're still too serious. He put a massive arm around Ned's shoulders. I had planned to wait a few days to speak to you, but I see now there's no need for it. Come, walk with me. They started back down between the pillars. Blind stone eyes seemed to follow them as they passed. The king kept his arm around Ned's shoulder. You must have wondered why I finally came north to Winterfell after so long. Ned had his suspicions, but he did not give them voice. For the joy of my company, surely, he said lightly. And there's the wall. You need to see it, your grace, to walk along its battlements and talk to those who man it. The Night's Watch is a shadow of what it once was. Benjen says, no doubt I will hear what your brother says soon enough, Robert said. The wall has stood for what, 8,000 years? It can take a few days more. I have more pressing concerns. These are difficult times. I need good men about me, men like Jon Arryn. He served as Lord of the Eyrie, as Warden of the East, as the Hand of the King. He will not be easy to replace. His son, Ned began. His son will succeed to the Eyrie and all its incomes, Robert said brusquely. No more. That took Ned by surprise. He stopped, startled, and turned to look at his king. The words came unbided. The Arryns have always been Wardens of the East. The title goes with the domain. Perhaps when he comes of age, the honor can be restored to him, Robert said. I have this year to think of, and the next. A 6-year-old boy is no war leader, Ned. In peace, the title is only an honor. Let the boy keep it, for his father's sake, if not his own. Surely you owe Jon that much for his service. The king was not pleased, took his arm from around Ned's shoulders. Jon's service was the duty he owed his liege lord. I'm not ungrateful, Ned. You of all men ought to know that, but the son is not the father. A mere boy cannot hold the East. Then his tone softened. Enough of this. There is more important office to discuss, and I would not argue with you. Robert grasped Ned by the elbow. I have need of you, Ned. I'm yours to command your grace, always. They were words he had to say, and so he said them, apprehensive about what might come next. Robert scarcely seemed to hear him. Those years we spent in the Eyrie, gods, those were good years. I want you at my side again, Ned. I want you down in King's Landing, not up here at the end of the world, where you are no damned use to anybody. Robert looked off into the darkness, for a moment as melancholy as a stark. I swear to you, sitting a throne is 1,000 times harder than winning one. Laws are a tedious business, and counting coppers is worse. And the people, there is no end of them. I sit on that damnable iron chair and listen to them complain until my mind is numb and my ass is raw. They all want something, money or land or justice. The lies they tell, and the lords and ladies are no better. I am surrounded by flatterers and fools. It can drive a man to madness, Ned. Half of them don't dare tell me the truth, and the other half can't find it. There are nights where I wish we had lost at the Trident. No, not truly, but I understand, Ned said softly. Robert looked at him. I think you do. If so, you are the only one, my old friend. He smiled. Lord Eddard Stark, I would name you the Hand of the King. Ned dropped to one knee. The offer did not surprise him. What other reason could Robert have had for coming so far? The Hand of the King was the second most powerful man in the 7 kingdoms. He spoke with the king's voice, commanded the king's armies, drafted the king's laws. At times he even sat upon the Iron Throne to dispense king's justice when the king was absent or sick or otherwise indisposed. Robert was offering him a responsibility as large as the realm itself. It was the last thing in the world he wanted. Your Grace, he said, I am not worthy of the honor. Robert groaned with good-humored impatience. If I wanted to honor you, I'd let you retire. I'm planning to make you run the kingdom and fight the wars while I eat and drink and wench myself into an early grave. He slapped his gut prettier way to put it. The king eats, they say, and the hand takes the shit. He threw his head back and roared his laughter. The echoes rang through the darkness, and all around them the dead of Winterfell seemed to watch with cold and disapproving eyes. Finally, the laughter dwindled and stopped. Ned was still on one knee, his eyes upraised. "Damn it, Ned," the king complained. "You might at least humor me with a smile. They say it grows so cold up here in winter that a man's laughter freezes in his throat and chokes him to death," Ned said evenly. "Perhaps that is why the Starks have so little humor. Come south with me, and I'll teach you how to laugh again," the king promised. "You helped me win this damnable throne. Now help me hold it. We were meant to rule together. If Lyanna had lived, we should have been brothers, bound by blood as well as affection. Well, it is not too late. I have a son, you have a daughter. My Joff and your Sansa will join our houses, as Lyanna and I might have once done." This offer did surprise him. Sansa is only 11. Robert waved an impatient hand. "Old enough for a betrothal. The marriage can wait a few years." The king smiled. "Now stand up and say yes, curse you." "Nothing would give me greater pleasure, your grace," Ned answered. He hesitated. "These honors are all so unexpected. May I have some time to consider? I need to tell my wife." Yes, of course. Tell Catelyn. Sleep on it if you must." The king reached down, clasped Ned by the hand, and pulled him roughly to his feet. "Just don't keep me waiting too long. I am not the most patient of men." For a moment, Eddard Stark was filled with a terrible sense of foreboding. This was his place, here in the north. He looked at the stone figures all around them, breathed deep in the chill silence of the crypt. He could feel the eyes of the dead. They were all listening, he knew, and winter was coming. Chapter 5. Jon. There were times, not many, but a few, when Jon Snow was glad that he was a bastard. As he filled his wine cup once more from a passing flagon, it struck him that this might be one of them. He settled back in his place on the bench amongst the younger squires and drank. The sweet, fruity taste of summer wine filled his mouth and brought a smile to his lips. The great hall of Winterfell was hazy with smoke and heavy with the smell of roasted meat and fresh baked bread. Its grey stone walls were draped with banners, red, gold, crimson, the dire wolf of Stark, Baratheon's crowned stag, and the lion of Lannister. A singer was playing the high harp and reciting a ballad, but down at this end of the hall his voice could scarcely be heard above the roar of the fire, the clangor of pewter plates and cups, and the low mutter of 100 drunken conversations. It was the 4th hour of the welcoming feast laid for the king. Jon's brothers and sisters had been seated with the royal children. Beneath the raised platform where Lord and Lady Stark hosted the king and queen. In honor of the occasion, his lord father would doubtless permit each child a glass of wine, but no more than that. Down here on the benches, there was no one to stop Jon drinking as much as he had a thirst for, and he was finding that he had a man's thirst, to the raucous delight of the youths around him, who urged him on every time he drained a glass. They were fine company, and Jon relished the stories they were telling, tales of battle and bedding and the hunt. He was certain that his companions were more entertaining than the king's offspring. He had sated his curiosity about the visitors when they made their entrance. The procession had passed not a foot from the place he had been given on the bench, and Jon had gotten a good long look at them all. His lord father had come first, escorting the queen. She was as beautiful as men said. A jeweled tiara gleamed amidst her long golden hair, its emeralds a perfect match for the green of her eyes. His father helped her up the steps to the dais, and led her to her seat, but the queen never so much as looked at him. Even at 14, Jon could see through her smile. Next had come King Robert himself, with Lady Stark on his arm. The king was a great disappointment to Jon. His father had talked of him often. The peerless Robert Baratheon, demon of the Trident, the fiercest warrior of the realm, a giant among princes. Jon saw only a fat man, red-faced under his beard, sweating through his silks. He walked like a man half in the cups. After them came the children. Little Rook on first, managing the long walk with all the dignity a 3-year-old could muster. John had to urge him on when he stopped to visit. Close behind came Rob, a grey wool trimmed with white, the stark colours. He had the Princess Marcella on his arm. She was a wisp of a girl, not quite 8, her hair a cascade of golden curls under a jewelled net. John noticed the shy looks she gave Rob as they passed between the tables, and the timid way she smiled at him. He decided she was insipid. Rob didn't even have the sense to realize how stupid she was. He was grinning like a fool. His half-sisters escorted the royal princes. Arya was paired with the plump young Tommen, whose white blonde hair was longer than hers. Sansa, 2 years older, drew the crown prince, Joffrey Baratheon. He was 12, younger than Rob or John, but taller than either, to John's vast dismay. Prince Joffrey had his sister's hair and his mother's deep green eyes. A thick tangle of blonde curls dripped down past his golden choker and high velvet collar. Sansa looked radiant as she walked beside him, but John did not like Joffrey's pouty lips or the bored, disdainful way he looked at Winterfell's great hall. He was more interested in the pair that came behind him, the Queen's brothers, the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the Lion and the Imp. There was no mistaking which was which. So Jaime Lannister was twin to Queen Cersei, tall and golden with flashing green eyes and a smile that cut like a knife. He wore crimson silk, high black boots, a black satin cloak. On the breast of his tunic, the lion of his house was embroidered in gold thread, roaring its defiance. They called him the Lion of Lannister to his face, and whispered Kingslayer behind his back. John found it hard to look away from him. This is what a king should look like, he thought to himself as the man passed. Then he saw the other one, waddling along, half hidden by his brother's side, Tyrion Lannister, the youngest of Lord Tywin's brood, and by far the ugliest. All that the gods had given to Cersei and Jaime, they had denied Tyrion. He was a dwarf, half his brother's height, struggling to keep pace on stunted legs. His head was too large for his body, with a brute squashed-in face. Beneath a swollen shelf of brow, one green eye and one black one peered out from under a lank fall of hair, so blonde it seemed white. John watched him with fascination. The last of the High Lords to enter was his uncle, Benjen Stark of the Night's Watch, and his father's ward, young Theon Greyjoy. Something rubbed against his leg beneath the table. John saw red eyes staring up at him. "Hungry again?" he asked. There was still half a honeyed chicken in the center of the table. John reached out to tear off a leg, then had a better idea. He knifed the whole bird and let the carcass slide to the floor between his legs. Ghost ripped into it in a savage silence. His brothers and sisters had not been permitted to bring their wolves to the banquet, but there were more curs than John could count at this end of the hall, and no one had said a word about his pup. He told himself he was fortunate in that too. His eyes stung. He rubbed at them savagely, cursing the smoke. He swallowed another gulp of wine and watched his direwolf devour the chicken. Dogs moved between the tables, trailing after the serving girls. One of them, a black mongrel bitch with long yellow eyes, caught a scent of the chicken. She stopped and edged under the bench to get a share. John watched the confrontation. The bitch growled low in her throat and moved closer. Ghost looked up, silent, and fixed the dog with those hot red eyes. The bitch snapped an angry challenge. She was 3 times the size of the direwolf pup. Ghost did not move. He stood over his prize and opened his mouth, baring his fangs. The bitch tensed, barked again, then thought better of this fight. She turned and slunk it away, with one last defiant snap to save her pride. Ghost went back to his meal. John grinned and reached under the table to ruffle the shaggy white fur. The direwolf looked up at him, nipped gently at his hand, then went back to eating. "Is this one of the direwolves I've heard so much of?" a familiar voice asked close at hand. John looked up happily as his Uncle Ben put a hand on his head and ruffled his hair much as John had ruffled the wolves. "Yes," he said, "his name is Ghost." One of the squires interrupted the bawdy story he'd been telling to make room at the table for their lord's brother. Benjen Stark straddled the bench with his long legs and took the wine cup out of John's hand. "Summer wine," he said after a taste. "Nothing so sweet. How many cups have you had, John?" John smiled. Ben Stark laughed, as I feared. Ah, well, I believe I was younger than you the first time I got truly and sincerely drunk. He snagged a roasted onion, dripping brown with gravy, from a nearby trencher and bit into it. It crunched. His uncle was sharp-featured and gaunt as a mountain crag, but there was always a hint of laughter in his blue-grey eyes. He dressed in black, as befitted a man of the Night's Watch. Tonight it was a rich black velvet, with high leather boots and a wide belt with a silver buckle. A heavy silver chain was looped around his neck. Benjen watched Ghost with amusement as he ate his onion. A very quiet wolf, he observed. He's not like the others, John said. He never makes a sound. That's why I named him Ghost. That and because he's white. The others are all dark, grey or black. There are still dire wolves beyond the wall. We hear them on our rangings. Benjen Stark gave John a long look. Don't you usually eat at the table with your brothers? Most times, John answered in a flat voice. But tonight, Lady Stark thought it might give insult to the royal family to seat a bastard among them. I see. His uncle glanced over his shoulder at the raised table at the far end of the hall. My brother does not seem very festive tonight. John had noticed that too. A bastard had to learn to notice things, to read the truth that people hid behind their eyes. His father was observing all the courtesies, but there was tightness in him that John had seldom seen before. He said little, looking out over the hall with hooded eyes, seeing nothing. 2 seats away, the king had been drinking heavily all night. His broad face was flushed behind his great black beard. He made many a toast, laughed loudly at every jest, and attacked each dish like a starving man. But beside him, the queen seemed as cold as an ice sculpture. The queen is angry too, John told his uncle in a low, quiet voice. Father took the king down to the crypts this afternoon. The queen didn't want him to go. Benjen gave John a careful, measuring look. You don't miss much, do you, John? We could use a man like you on the wall. John swelled with pride. Rob is a stronger lance than I am, but I'm the better sword, and Helen says I sit a horse as well as anyone in the castle. Notable achievements. Take me with you when you go back to the wall, John said in a sudden rush. Father will give me leave to go if you ask him. I know he will. Uncle Benjen studied his face carefully. The wall is a hard place for a boy, John. I am almost a man grown, John protested. I will turn 15 on my next name day, and Maester Lewin says bastards grow up faster than any other children. That's true enough, Benjen said, with a downward twist of his mouth. He took John's cup from the table, filled it fresh from a nearby pitcher, and drank down a long swallow. Daeron Targaryen was only 14 when he conquered Dorne, John said. The young dragon was one of his heroes. A conquest that lasted a summer, his uncle pointed out. Your boy king lost 10,000 men taking the place, and another 50 trying to hold it. Someone should have told him that war isn't a game. He took another sip of wine. Also, he said, wiping his mouth, Daeron Targaryen was only 18 when he died, or have you forgotten that part? I forget nothing, John boasted. The wine was making him bold. He tried to sit very straight, to make himself seem taller. I want to serve in the Night's Watch, Uncle. He had thought on it long and hard, lying in bed at night while his brothers slept around him. Rob would someday inherit Winterfell, would command great armies as the Warden of the North. Bran and Rickon would be Rob's bannermen and rule holdfasts in his name. His sisters Arya and Sansa would marry the heirs of other great houses and go south as mistress of castles of their own. But what place could a bastard hope to earn? You don't know what you're asking, John. The Night's Watch is a sworn brotherhood. We have no families. None of us will ever father sons. Our wife is Judy, our mistress's honor. A bastard can have honor too, John said. I'm ready to swear your oath. You are a boy of 14, Benjen said. Not a man, not yet. Until you have known a woman, you cannot understand what you would be giving up. I don't care about that, John said hotly. You might if you knew what it meant, Benjen said. If you knew what the oath would cost you, you might be less eager to pay the price, son. John felt anger rise inside him. I'm not your son. Benjen Stark stood up. More's the pity. He put a hand on John's shoulder. Come back to me after you've fathered a few bastards of your own, and we'll see how you feel. John trembled. I will never father a bastard, he said carefully. Never. He spat it out like venom. Suddenly, he realized that the table had fallen silent, and they were all looking at him. He felt the tears begin to well behind his eyes. He pushed himself to his feet. "I must be excused," he said, with the last of his dignity. He whirled and bolted before they could see him cry. He must have drank more wine than he had realized. His feet got tangled under him as he tried to leave, and he lurched sideways into a serving girl and sent a flagon of spiced wine crashing to the floor. Laughter boomed all around him, and John felt hot tears on his cheeks. Someone tried to steady him. He wrenched free of their grip and ran, half blind, for the door. Ghost followed close at his heels, out into the night. The yard was quiet and empty. A lone sentry stood high on the battlements of the inner wall, his cloak pulled tight around him against the cold. He looked bored and miserable as he huddled there alone, but John would have traded places with him in an instant. Otherwise, the castle was dark and deserted. John had seen an abandoned holdfast once, a drear place where nothing moved but the wind, and the stones kept silent about whether people had lived there. Winterfell reminded him of that tonight. The sounds of music and song spilled through the open windows behind him. They were the last things John wanted to hear. He wiped away his tears on the sleeve of his shirt, furious that he had let them fall, and turned to go. "Boy," a voice called out to him. John turned. Tyrion Lannister was sitting on the ledge above the door to the great hall, looking for all the world like a gargoyle. The dwarf grinned down at him. "Is that animal a wolf?" "A dire wolf," John said. "His name is Ghost." He stared up at the little man, his disappointment suddenly forgotten. "What are you doing up there? Why aren't you at the feast?" "Too hot, too noisy, and I drunk too much wine," the dwarf told him. "I learned long ago that it is considered rude to vomit on your brother. Might I have a closer look at your wolf?" John hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Can you climb down, or shall I bring a ladder?" "Oh, bleed that," the little man said. He pushed himself off the ledge into the empty air. John gasped, then watched with awe as Tyrion Lannister spun around into a tight ball, landed lightly on his hands, then vaulted backwards onto his legs. Ghost backed away from him uncertainly. The dwarf dusted himself off and laughed. "I believe I've frightened your wolf. My apologies." "He's not scared," John said. He knelt and called out, "Ghost, come here. Come on, that's it." The wolf pup padded closer and nuzzled at John's face, but he kept a wary eye on Tyrion Lannister, and when the dwarf reached out to pet him, he drew back and bared his fangs in a silent snarl. "Shy, isn't he?" Lannister observed. "Sit, Ghost," John commanded. "That's it. Keep still." He looked up at the dwarf. "You can touch him now. He won't move until I tell him to. I've been training him." "I see," Lannister said. He ruffled the snow-white fur between Ghost's ears and said, "Nice wolf." "If I wasn't here, he'd tear out your throat," John said. It wasn't actually true yet, but it would be. "In that case, you had best stay close," the dwarf said. He cocked his oversized head to one side and looked John over with his mismatched eyes. "I'm Tyrion Lannister." "I know," John said. He rose. Standing, he was taller than the dwarf. It made him feel strange. "You're Ned Stark's bastard, aren't you?" John felt a coldness pass right through him. He pressed his lips together and said nothing. "Did I offend you?" Lannister said. "Sorry. Dwarfs don't have to be tactful. Generations of capering fools in motley have won me the right to dress badly and say any damn thing that comes into my head." He grinned. "You are the bastard, though." "Lord Eddard Stark is my father," John admitted stiffly. Lannister studied his face. "Yes," he said, "I can see it. You have more of the North in you than your brothers." "Half-brothers," John corrected. He was pleased by the dwarf's comment, but he tried not to let it show. "Let me give you some counsel, bastard," Lannister said. "Never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength, then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you." John was in no mood for anyone's counsel. "What do you know about being a bastard?" "All dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes." "You are your mother's true-born son of Lannister." "Am I?" the dwarf replied, sardonic. "Do tell my lord father. My mother died birthing me, and he's never been sure." "I don't even know who my mother was," John said. "Some woman, no doubt. Most of them are." He favored John with a rueful grin. "Remember this, boy. All dwarfs may be bastards, yet not all bastards need be dwarves." and with that he turned and sauntered back into the feast, whistling a tune. When he opened the door, the light from within threw his shadow clear across the yard, and for just a moment Tyrion Lannister stood tall as a king. I think we could probably get one more in. Maybe I don't know, I'm pretty sure this one's pretty short from what I remember compared to the other ones, but we'll give it a go. So this is chapter 6. Chapter 6, Catelyn. Of all the rooms in Winterfell's great keep, Catelyn's bedchambers were the hottest. She seldom had to light a fire. The castle had been built over natural hot springs, and the scalding waters rushed through its walls and chambers like blood through a man's body, driving the chill from the stone halls, filling the glass gardens with a moist warmth, keeping the earth from freezing. Open pools smoked day and night in a dozen small courtyards. That was a little thing in summer. In winter, it was the difference between life and death. Catelyn's bath was always hot and steaming, and her walls warm to the touch. The warmth reminded her of Riverrun, of days in the sun with Lysa and Edmure, but Ned could never abide the heat. The Starks were made for the cold, he would tell her, and she would laugh and tell him, in that case, they had certainly built their castle in the wrong place. So when they had finished, Ned rolled off and climbed from her bed as he had 1,000 times before. He crossed the room, pulled back the heavy tapestries, and threw open the high narrow windows one by one, letting the night air into the chamber. The wind swirled around him as he stood facing the dark, naked and empty-handed. Catelyn pulled the furs up to her chin and watched him. He looked somehow smaller and more vulnerable, like the youth she had wed in the sept at Riverrun 15 long years ago. Her loins still ached from the urgency of his love-making. It was a good ache. It was a good ache. She could feel his seed within her. She prayed that it might quicken there. It had been 3 years since Rickon. She was not too old. She could give him another son. I will refuse him, Ned said as he turned back to her. His eyes were haunted, his voice thick with doubt. Catelyn sat up in the bed. You cannot, you must not. My duties are here in the north. I have no wish to be Robert's hand. He will not understand that. He is a king now, and kings are not like other men. If you refuse to serve him, he will wonder why, and sooner or later he will begin to suspect that you oppose him. Can you see the danger that would put us in? Ned shook his head, refusing to believe. Robert would never harm me or any of mine. We were closer than brothers. He loves me. If I refuse him, he will roar and curse and bluster, and in a week we will laugh about it together. I know the man. You knew the man, she said. The king is a stranger to you. Catelyn remembered the direwolf, dead in the snow. The broken antler lodged deep in her throat. She had to make him see. Pride is everything to a king, my lord. Robert came all this way to see you, to bring you to these great honors. You cannot throw them back in his face. Honors, Ned laughed bitterly. In his eyes, yes, she said, and in yours, and in mine. She blazed angry now. Why couldn't he see? He offers his own son in marriage to our daughter. What else would you call that? Sansa might someday be queen. Her sons could rule from the wall to the mountains of Dorne. What is so wrong with that? God's Catelyn, Sansa is only 11, Ned said, and Joffrey is... She finished for him, crown prince and heir to the Iron Throne, and I was only 12 when my father promised me to your brother Brandon. That brought a bitter twist to Ned's mouth. Brandon. Yes, Brandon would know what to do. He always did. It was all meant for Brandon. You, Winterfell, everything. He was born to be a king's hand and a father to queens. I never asked for this cup to pass to me. Perhaps not, Catelyn said, but Brandon is dead, and the cup has passed, and you must drink from it, like it or not. Ned turned away from her, back to the night. He sat staring out into the darkness, watching the moon and the stars perhaps, or perhaps the sentries on the wall. Catelyn softened then, to see his pain. Eddard Stark had married her in Brandon's place, as custom decreed, but the shadow of his dead brother still lay between them, as did the other, the shadow of the woman he would not name, the woman who had borne him his bastard son. She was about to go to him when the knock came at the door, loud and unexpected. Ned turned, frowning. What is it? Desmond's voice came through the door. My lord, Maester Luwin is without and begs urgent audience. You told him I left orders not to be disturbed. Yes, my lord, he insists. Very well, send him in. Ned crossed to the wardrobe and slipped on a heavy robe. Catelyn realized suddenly how cold it had become. She sat up in bed and pulled the first urge in. Perhaps we should close the window, she suggested. Ned nodded absently. Maester Luwin was shown in. The maester was a small grey man. His eyes were grey and quick and saw much. His hair was grey, what little the years had left him. His robe was grey wool, trimmed with white furs, the stark colours. Its great floppy sleeves had pockets hidden inside them. Luwin was always tucking things into those sleeves and producing other things from them. Books, messages, strange artifacts, toys for the children. With all he kept hidden in his sleeves, Catelyn was surprised that Maester Luwin could lift his arms at all. The maester waited until the door had closed behind him before he spoke. "My lord," he said to Ned, "pardon for disturbing your rest. I have been left a message." Ned looked irritated. "Been left? By whom? Has there been a rider? I was not told." "There was no rider, my lord, only a carved wooden box, left on a table in my observatory while I napped. My servants saw no one, but it must have been brought by someone in the king's party. We have had no other visitors from the south." "A wooden box, you say?" Catelyn said. Inside was a fine new lens for the observatory, from Mir by the look of it. The lens crafter of Mir are without equal. Ned frowned. He had little patience for this sort of thing, Catelyn knew. "A lens," he said. "What has that to do with me?" "I asked the same question," Maester Luwin said. Clearly there was more to this thing than the seeming. Under the heavy weight of her furs, Catelyn shivered. "A lens is an instrument to help us see." "Indeed it is." He fingered the collar of his order, a heavy chain worn tight around the neck beneath his robe, each link forged from a different metal. Catelyn could feel dread stirring inside her once again. What is it that they would have us see more clearly? The very thing I asked myself. Maester Luwin drew a tightly rolled paper out of his sleeve. "I found the true message concealed with a false bottom when I dismantled the box the lens had come in, but it is not for my eyes." Ned held out his hand. "Let me have it, then." Luwin did not stir. "Pardons, my lord. The message is not for you either. It is marked for the eyes of Lady Catelyn and her alone. May I approach?" Catelyn nodded, not trusting to speak. The maester placed the paper on the table beside the bed. It was sealed with a small blob of blue wax. Luwin bowed and began to retreat. "Stay," Ned commanded him. His voice was grave. He looked at Catelyn. "What is it? My lady, you're shaking." "I'm afraid," she admitted. She reached out and took the letter in trembling hands. The furs dropped away from her nakedness, forgotten. In the blue wax was the moon and falcon seal of House Arryn. "It's from Lysa." Catelyn looked at her husband. "It will not make us glad," she told him. "There is grief in this message, Ned. I can feel it." Ned frowned, his face darkening. "Open it." Catelyn broke the seal. Her eyes moved over the words. At first, they made no sense to her. Then she remembered. Lysa took no chances. When we were girls together, we had a private language, she and I. "Can you read it?" "Yes," Catelyn admitted. "Then tell us." "Perhaps I should withdraw," Maester Luwin said. "No," Catelyn said. "We will need your counsel." She threw back the furs and climbed from the bed. The night air was as cold as the grave on her bare skin as she padded across the room. Maester Luwin averted his eyes. Even Ned looked shocked. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Lighting a fire," Catelyn told him. She found a dressing gown and shrugged into it, then knelt over the cold hearth. "Maester Luwin," Ned began. "Maester Luwin has delivered all of my children," Catelyn said. "This is no time for false modesty." She slid the paper in among the kindling and placed the heavier logs on top of it. Ned crossed the room, took her by the arm, and pulled her to her feet. He held her there, his face inches from hers. "My lady, tell me, what was this message?" Catelyn stiffened in his grasp. "A warning," she said softly, "if we have the wits to hear." His eyes searched her face. "Go on." "Lysa says John Arryn was murdered." His fingers tightened on her arm. "By whom?" "The Lannisters," she told him. "The Queen." Ned released his hold on her arm. There was deep red marks on her skin. "Gods," he whispered. His voice was hoarse. Your sister is sick with grief. She cannot know what she is saying. She knows, Catelyn said. Lysa is impulsive, yes, but this message was carefully planned, cleverly hidden. She knew it meant death if her letter fell into the wrong hands. To risk so much, she has to have had more than mere suspicion. Catelyn looked to her husband. Now we truly have no choice. You must be Robert's hand. You must go south with him and learn the truth. She saw at once that Ned had reached a very different conclusion. The only truths I know are here. The south is a nest of adders I would do better to avoid. Lewin plucked at his chain collar where it had chafed the soft skin of his throat. The hand of the king has great power, my lord. Power to find the truth of Lord Arryn's death, to bring his killers to the king's justice. Power to protect Lady Arryn and her son if the worst be true. Ned glanced helplessly around the bedchamber. Catelyn's heart went out to him, but she knew she could not take him in her arms just then. First, the victory must be won for her children's sake. You say you love Robert like a brother. Would you leave your brother surrounded by Lannisters? The others take both of you, Ned muttered darkly. He turned away from them and went to the window. She did not speak, nor did the maester. They waited, quiet, while Eddard Stark said a silent farewell to the home he loved. When he turned away from the window at last, his voice was tired and full of melancholy, and moisture glittered faintly in the corners of his eyes. My father went south once, to answer the summons of a king. He never came home again. A different time, Maester Lewin said. A different king. Yes, Ned said dully. He seated himself in a chair by the hearth. Catelyn, you shall stay here in Winterfell. His words were like an icy draught through her heart. No, she said, suddenly afraid. Was this to be her punishment? Never to see his face again, nor to feel his arms around her. Yes, Ned said, in words that broke no argument. You must govern the north in my stead while I run Robert's errands. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell. Rob is 14. Soon enough he will be a man grown. He must learn to rule, and I will not be here for him. Make him a part of your councils. He must be ready when his time comes. God's will, not for many years, Maester Lewin murmured. Maester Lewin, I trust you as I would my own blood. Give my wife your voice in all things great and small. Teach my son the things he needs to know. Winter is coming. Maester Lewin nodded gravely. Then silence fell until Catelyn found her courage. Asked the question whose answer she most dreaded. What of the other children? Ned stood and took her in his arms, then held her face close to his. Rickon is very young, he said gently. He should stay here with you and Rob. The others I would take with me. I could not bear it, Catelyn said, trembling. You must, he said. Sansa must wed Joffrey. That is clear now. We must give them no grounds to suspect our devotion. And it is past time that Arya learned the ways of a southern court. In a few years she will be of an age to marry too. Sansa would shine in the south, Catelyn thought to herself, and the gods knew that Arya needed refinement. Reluctantly, she let go of them in her heart. But not Bran, never Bran. Yes, she said, but please, Ned, for the love you bear me, let Bran remain here at Winterfell. He is only 7. I was 8 when my father sent me to foster at the Eyrie, Ned said. Sir Roderick tells me there is bad feeling between Robb and Prince Joffrey. That is not healthy. Bran can bridge that distance. He is a sweet boy, quick to laugh, easy to love. Let him grow up with the young princes. Let him become their friend, as Robert became mine. Our house will be safer for it. He was right, Catelyn knew it. It did not make the pain any easier to bear. She would lose all 4 of them then, Ned and both girls, and her sweet, loving Bran. Only Robb and little Rickon would be left to her. She felt lonely already. Winterfell was such a vast place. Keep him off the walls then, she said bravely. You know how Bran loves to climb. Ned kissed the tears from her eyes before they could fall. Thank you, my lady, he whispered. This is hard, I know. What of Jon Snow, my lord? Maester Lewin asked. Catelyn tensed at the mention of the name. Ned felt the anger in her and pulled away. Many men fathered bastards. Catelyn had grown up with that knowledge. It came as no surprise to her in the first year of her marriage to learn that Ned had fathered a child on some girl chance met on campaign. He'd a man's needs after all, and they had spent that year apart, Ned off at war in the south, while she remained safe in her father's castle at River Run. Her thoughts were more of Rob, the infant at her breast, than of the husband she scarcely knew. He was welcome to whatever solace he might find between battles, and if his seed quickened, she expected he would see to the child's needs. He did more than that. The Starks were not like other men. Ned brought the bastard home with him, and called him son for all the north to see. When the wars were over at last, and Catelyn rode to Winterfell, John and his wet nurse had already taken up residence. That cut deep. Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word, but a castle has no secrets, and Catelyn had heard her maids repeating tales that he had heard from the lips of her husband's soldiers. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of Aerys Kingsguard, and of how their young lord had slain him in single combat. And they told how afterward Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. The Lady Ashara Dane, tall and fair with haunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband the truth of it, asked him to his face. That was the only time in all their years that Ned had ever frightened her. Never ask me about John, he said, cold as ice. He is my blood, and that is all you need to know. And now I will learn where you heard that name, my lady. She had pledged to obey, she told him, and from that day on the whispering had stopped, and Ashara Dane's name was never heard in Winterfell again. Whoever John's mother had been, Ned must have loved her fiercely, for nothing Catelyn said would persuade him to send the boy away. It was the one thing she could never forgive him. She had come to love her husband with all her heart, but she had never found it in her to love John. She might have overlooked a dozen bastards for Ned's sake, so long as they were out of sight. John was never out of sight, and as he grew, he looked more like Ned than any of the true-born sons she bore him. Somehow, that made it worse. John must go, she said now. He and Robert close, Ned said. I had hoped. He cannot stay here, Catelyn said, cutting him off. He is your son, not mine. I will not have him. It was hard, she knew, but no less the truth. Ned would do the boy no kindness by leaving him here in Winterfell. The look Ned gave her was anguished. You know I cannot take him south. There will be no place for him at court. A boy with a bastard's name. You know what they will say of him. He will be shunned. Catelyn armored her heart against the mute appeal in her husband's eyes. They say your friend Robert has fathered a dozen bastards himself, and none of them has ever been seen at court, Ned blazed. The Lannister woman has seen to that. How can you be so damnably cruel, Catelyn? He is only a boy. His fury was on him. He might have said more and worse, but Maester Luwin cut in. Another solution presents itself, he said, his voice quiet. Your brother Brendan came to me about John a few days ago. It seems the boy aspires to take the Black. Ned looked shocked. He asked to join the Night's Watch. Catelyn said nothing. Let Ned work it out in his own mind. Her voice would not be welcome now. Yet gladly she would have kissed the Maester just then. His was the perfect solution. Benjen Stark was a sworn brother. John would be a son to him, the child he would never have. And in time the boy would take the oath as well. He would father no sons who might someday contest with Catelyn's own grandchildren for Winterfell. Maester Luwin said, There is great honor in service on the wall, my lord, and even a bastard may rise high in the Night's Watch, Ned reflected. Still, his voice was troubled. John is so young. If he asked this when he was a man grown, that would be one thing, but a boy of 14. A hard sacrifice, Maester Luwin agreed. Yet these are hard times, my lord. His road is no crueler than yours or your lady's. Catelyn thought of the 3 children she must lose. It was not easy keeping silent then. Ned turned away from them to gaze out the window, his long face silent and thoughtful. Finally he sighed and turned back. Very well, he said to Maester Luwin. I suppose it is for the best. I will speak to Ben. And shall we tell John? The Maester asked. And I must. Preparations must be made. It will be a fortnight before we are ready to depart. I would sooner let John enjoy these last few days. Summer will end soon enough, and childhood as well. When the time comes, I will tell him myself. that's the end of chapter 5, and I think we're gonna end it there because the video's got like maybe 6 minutes left. And the next chapter that we're reading is gonna be Arya's point of view, chapter 6 or 7, I can't remember. We just did chapter. Okay, we just did chapter 6, so chapter 7 is Arya, and we'll do that in the next episode. But for now, that is going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the next one.